Welcome to Part 8 on the road to secession. Now we're going to talk about the Dred Scott decision. Sectional tension mile marker number 15 has to do with probably one of the most tragic decisions in Supreme Court history. The case of Dred Scott versus John Sanford, right? Dred Scott, you see there at the top here, was a slave that was born into the plantation of the Blow family in 1795 in Southampton County, Virginia, the same Southampton County where the Nat Turner Rebellion took place. He grew up there, but he was sold as a young adult to a doctor living in Missouri named Dr. John Emerson, right? Now, the relationship between John Emerson and Dred Scott was probably pretty good because, for example, Dred Scott, when he was done with his work, was allowed to go do odd jobs for other people, and he was allowed to keep money he earned doing that, right? Well, Dr. Emerson lived in the slave state of Missouri, but he was often sent on duty elsewhere, and Dred Scott, his manservant, would go with him. As a result, Dred Scott lived in the free state of Illinois for a time and also lived in the free territory of Minnesota. The area now is part of modern-day Wisconsin, right? So when Dred Scott claims that John Emerson had promised to free him in his will, I have a tendency to want to believe that that's true. But in 1846, Dr. Emerson died suddenly, right? And so there was no will. So Dred Scott was left to approaching the widow of Dr. Emerson and telling her, hey, Dr. Emerson had promised to free me when he died. I was wondering if you would honor that. And she tells him no. So he says, well, hold on. I've saved up some money. Can I buy my freedom? And again, she says no. So Dred Scott decides to take a different course of action. He decides to sue for his freedom. And he's actually got some legal precedent to help him out. There had actually been a couple cases in the state of Missouri where a slave who had lived in a free territory or a free state for a while had come back to Missouri, sued for their freedom, and had won. Okay, so this should be a pretty slam dunk case, because after all, he's lived in a free state and a free federal territory, right? But it's also a different time, right? Well, by the time he files these lawsuits, now slavery is the primary social issue in the United States. So when his case goes to trial in St. Louis, he'll actually lose it. All right, so he reconfigures the trial, he files again, and then he wins his second suit. But that one gets appealed to the Missouri Supreme Court, and it gets overturned in the Supreme Court. By this time, the estate of Mrs. Emerson has been turned over to her brother, John Sanford. And notice I said Sanford and not Sandford. John Sanford gets to go through history of being involved in one of the most famous Supreme Court cases of all time, but his name is misspelled on it, right? John Sanford is the executor of the estate now, and he lives in New York. Because he lives in New York, and because Dred Scott lives in Missouri, he decides that he can reconstitute this case as a constitutional one, right? Because now we have commerce that crosses borders, and the Commerce Clause of the Constitution makes it where he can make a Fifth Amendment argument for his freedom. So in 1854, now this suit gets filed as Dred Scott versus Sanford, right? And it makes its way all the way up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is going to rule, though, on March 6, 1857, against Dred Scott. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is a man from Maryland by the name of Roger Taney. And Roger Taney, in a 7-2 ruling, is going to agree that Dred Scott cannot be freed because he couldn't sue in the first place. Now, the question then is, why can't he sue? Roger Taney states that he couldn't sue not because he was a slave. It wasn't an argument, he can't sue because he's property and property can't sue. No, he can't sue because he's black. And the Supreme Court decision here states that Blacks, whether slave or free, are not citizens of the United States. In Taney's decision, he writes, blacks were not intended to be included under the word citizen in the Constitution and can therefore claim none of the rights and privileges which that instrument provides for and secures to the citizens of the United States. On the contrary, they were at the time considered as subordinate and inferior class of beings who were subjugated by the dominant race, and whether emancipated or not, yet remained subject to their authority and had no rights or privileges but such those who held the power and the government might choose to grant them. Okay. Now, this is a very important decision because here's the thing. How is whether or not you're a citizen of the United States determined? What does the Constitution say about citizenship? Well, it says nothing. The Constitution does not define citizenship. The Founding Fathers saw no reason to put it in there, and the reason why was simple. If you're a citizen of the state that you live in, this confederation of states under this Constitution, if you're a citizen of this state, you are by proxy a citizen of the nation. So if you're a citizen of the state of New York, you are also a citizen of the United States. You don't have to have that in the Constitution. So the Constitution doesn't define citizenship. The Roger Taney decision, for the first time, actually makes a constitutional decision on national citizenship. But it's one in which takes citizenship away. So if you are, for Dred Scott, well, he is a slave still, and he's just, a member, he just lives in Missouri, right? But what if you were a African American living in New York, born and raised and considered a citizen of New York, and therefore your entire life considered a citizen of the United States? What just happened to you? You just lost your citizenship. Your citizenship has been stripped away because Taney in the Supreme Court has just defined citizenship as not including blacks, right? So that's why eventually we're going to have a 14th Amendment which defines citizenship in the United States in order to rectify this Dred Scott decision, right? This is why this is such an important decision in U.S. and Supreme Court history.